Hello everyone, welcome back to Sleepless MTG. Today we will be going over my deck tech for Duskana the Rage Mother. This is a 2/2 tribal deck that's all about playing a bunch of creatures that are 2/2s and then swinging in for a bunch of damage. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video and let's just jump right in. So let's go ahead and take a look at Duskana herself. So Duskana the Rage Mother is a 5-mana, 5/5 legendary creature bear. She costs 2 colorless, 1 red, 1 green, and 1 white. So she's a Naya commander. And she says, when Duskana the Rage Mother enters the battlefield, draw a card for each creature you control with base power and toughness 2/2. Whenever creatures you control with base power and toughness 2/2 attack, it gets +3/+3 until end of turn. So this came in the Deadly Disguise precon for Murders at Karlov Manor, and I decided to build the secondary commander here, which is Duskana, and I decided to not focus on morph, because the precon was all about morphing and manifesting and all that stuff. I just wanted to do 2/2 tribal, because I think it's a lot more enjoyable for me. I'm not really a big fan of morph or disguise or all that keywords and stuff. So yeah, so we'll just be playing a bunch of 2/2 creatures. And so, in case you don't know, a creature has base power and toughness 2/2 even if it has counters on it. So if you have a 2/2 that has like 5 counters on it, it'll still get that trigger and get +3/+3 when it attacks. And then, so we want to play a bunch of 2/2 creatures, and then we want to flicker Duskana because that ETB ability is phenomenal. So let's go ahead and jump into our first category here, which will be Planeswalkers. So we are running 4 Planeswalkers. First one here is Arlen the Pack's Hope. This is a 4-mana, 4 loyalty legendary Planeswalker Arlen. She has Daybound, so if a player casts no spells during their turn, it becomes night next turn. +1, until your next turn, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. And -3, you get to create 2 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. And then she can transform. We are not a transform deck, unlike my last video, which was all about that. We're just playing her for the buff that she gives, and of course the 2/2 wolves. So we'll probably never transform her, but I'll read the transform side anyway. Arlen the Moon's Fury, same loyalty, legendary Planeswalker Arlen. She's got Nightbound. You can +2 to add red or green, or red and green, sorry. And then you can 0 loyalty to, until end of turn, Arlen the Moon's Fury becomes a 5/5 werewolf creature with trample, indestructible, and haste. Next up here, we have the Eternal Wanderer, a 6-mana, 5 loyalty legendary Planeswalker, who has a static ability saying no more than 1 creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat. You can +1 to exile up to 1 target artifact or creature, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of that player's next end step. You can 0 to create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with double strike, and then -4 for each player, choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all creatures they control not chosen this way. So this Planeswalker is just phenomenal in this deck. +1, you get to flicker your commander, draw a bunch of cards. For 0, you can create a 2/2, and then on your next turn, you can flicker. And then -4 is a kind of one-sided board wipe. It'll wipe your board as well, but you'll get to choose what people sacrifice, so it's really good. And speaking of the Wanderer, we have the Wandering Emperor. The Wandering Emperor is our next Planeswalker, a 4-mana, 3 loyalty legendary Planeswalker who has Flash. And as long as the Wandering Emperor entered the battlefield this turn, you may activate her loyalty abilities anytime you could cast an instant. So you can +1 to put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. It gains first strike until end of turn. You can -1 to create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance, and -3 exile target tapped creature, you gain 2 life. So this one's fun because you can just flash it out and then activate the loyalty abilities right away, which can be pretty tricky sometimes for your opponents. And our last Planeswalker is Xenagos the Reveler, a 4-mana, 3 loyalty legendary Planeswalker Xenagos. You can +1 to add X mana of any combination of red and or green to your mana pool, where X is the number of creatures you control. You can 0 to put a 2/2 red and green Satyr creature token with haste onto the battlefield. and you can -6 to exile the top 7 cards of your library. You may put any number of creature cards and or land cards from among them onto the battlefield. So the +1 is basically a Growing Rites of Itlimoc, which is also in the deck, spoiler alert. But yeah, that's a really good +1. And then 0 just to create a 2/2, which is great for Duskana. It's basically all of your 2/2s are going to be 5/5s as long as you control your commander, which can be backbreaking for your opponents. Okay, our next category is going to be creatures, and our first creature here is Agitator Ant, a 3-mana 2/2 creature insect. At the beginning of your end step, each player may put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control. Goad each creature that had counters put on it this way. So goading is until your next turn. Those creatures attack each combat if able and attack a player other than you if able. Okay, our next creature is Adeline Jackal, a 3-mana 2/2 creature human Tyrannid scout who has Trample and Haste and the Skilled Outrider ability. So whenever Adeline Jackal deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Ayula, Queen Among Bears, is up next. A 2-mana 2/2 legendary creature bear. Whenever another bear enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target bear, or target bear you control fights target creature you don't control. Now, this is not bear tribal, but this does synergize well with our commander, who is a bear, obviously, and then there's a lot of ways to make bear tokens in this deck, but there's not many bear creatures, so. Bane of Progress is up next, a 6-mana 2/2 creature elemental. When it enters the battlefield, destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Put a +1/+1 counter on Bane of Progress for each permanent destroyed this way. So this is what I was talking about earlier. You know, say you destroy 12 artifacts and enchantments. It gets 12 +1/+1 counters. Then when it attacks, even though its power is greater than 2, it'll still get that buff because its base power and toughness is 2/2. So this can be a really, really devastating card for attacking in. Beast Whisperer is up next. A 4-mana 2/3 creature elf druid, and it says whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Now this will not synergize with our commander in terms of having base power and toughness 2/2, but this is just a great card to run in a creature heavy deck, just drawing a bunch of cards. Another non-synergizing card, but still good, is Birds of Paradise, a 1-mana 0/1 creature bird. It has flying, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Bounty Agent is up next, a 2-mana 2/2 creature human soldier. It has vigilance, and you can tap it and sacrifice it. Destroy target legendary permanent that's an artifact, creature, or enchantment. Up next, we have Bramble Familiar. This is a 2-mana 2/2 creature elemental raccoon. You can cast it for the adventure side, so you can exile it after you resolve it. So it is Fetch Quest, a 7-mana sorcery. You mill 7 cards, then put a creature, enchantment, or land card from among the milled cards onto the battlefield. And then you can cast it for its creature side instead or after it goes on the adventure. And the creature side says tap to add 4 green. Or you can pay 2 mana and tap it to discard a card, return it to its owner's hand. Caller of the Claw is next, a 3-mana 2/2 creature elf that has flash. And when it enters the battlefield, put a 2/2 green bear creature token onto the battlefield for each non-token creature card put into your graveyard from the battlefield this turn. So play this after someone wipes your board or after you wipe your board and get a bunch of bears. Charming Prince is next, a 2-mana 2/2 creature human noble. When it enters the battlefield, choose one. Scry 2, you gain 3 life. Or exile another target creature you own, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. Deep Gnome Terramancer is a 2-mana 2/2 creature gnome wizard who has flash. It has Mold Earth, so whenever one or more lands enter the battlefield under an opponent's control without being played, you may search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Do this only once each turn. A new card here is Delny, Streetwise Lookout, a 3-mana 2/2 legendary creature, human scout. Creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. And then if an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Now, this is kind of a non-bow with our commander out, because our commander is going to be buffing our creatures, so they're never just going to be 2/2 swinging in. But the nice thing is that she will double the abilities, so, if you play something like your Charming Prince or Deep Gnome Terramancer, it'll trigger again. And then if you don't have your commander out, just being able to swing in without worrying about blockers is very good. So that's why we're including this card. Dockside Extortionist is up next, a 2-mana 1/2 creature goblin pirate. When it enters the battlefield, create X treasure tokens, where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. It doesn't synergize with our commander in the term of having 2/2, but it's just a great card, and it'll accelerate your game very nicely. Goblin Anarchomancer is up next, a 2-mana 2/2 creature goblin shaman. And it says, each spell you cast that's red or green costs 1 colorless less to cast. Grand Abolisher is our next creature, a 2-mana 2/2 creature human cleric. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. We have Huntmaster of the Fells, a 4-mana 2/2 creature human werewolf. When this creature enters the battlefield or transforms into Huntmaster of the Fells, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token and you gain 2 life. At the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform Huntmaster of the Fells. Now, like I said earlier, we're most likely not going to transform these things. We have no way to force transformations, but it's just nice playing this card because you get 2 2/2s. But it'll transform into Ravager of the Fells, a creature werewolf. That's a 4/4. It has trample. Whenever this creature transforms into Ravager of the Fells, it deals 2 damage to target opponent or planeswalker and 2 damage to up to 1 target creature that player or that planeswalker's controller controls. At the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells last turn, transform Ravager of the Fells. So, like I said, we're not going to transform it, but, if someone doesn't cast any spells, it'll be nice to get that transform and ping something, so. Never say never, I guess. Next up, we have Isimaru, Hound of Konda, a 1-mana 2/2. Doesn't have any abilities. It is a legendary creature hound, but for 1 mana, getting essentially a 5/5 with our commander out is very good. Jetmir, Nexus of Revels, is a win con in our deck. This is a 4-mana 5/4 legendary creature cat demon. He says, creatures you control get +1/+0 and have vigilance as long as you control 3 or more creatures. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and have trample as long as you control 6 or more creatures. And creatures you control also get +1/+0 and have double strike as long as you control 9 or more creatures. So, flood the board, play this guy, and you'll probably win that turn. So, yeah. He doesn't synergize, but still very good in the terms of our commander. But he does synergize with what we're doing, I guess. Kutzil, Malamet Exemplar is up next. A 3-mana 3/3 legendary creature cat warrior. And it says your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, and whenever 1 or more creatures you control with power greater than its base power deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Which is every single commander, or every single creature that's a 2/2, because it'll get a buff from our commander, so it'll have greater base power and toughness, so we'll draw a card. Very good. Mirran Crusader is up next. I always want to say Crusher, but it's Mirran Crusader. A 3-mana 2/2 creature, human knight. It has double strike, protection from black and from green. So it can't be damaged, targeted by, blocked by anything that is black or green. Oran Frostfang is up next. A 5-mana 2/6 snow creature snake. Attacking creatures you control have death touch, and then whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Oracle of Moldiah is up next, a 4-mana 2/2 creature elf shaman. You can play an additional land on each of your turns, play with the top card of your library revealed, and you may play lands from the top of your library. We have Scavenging Ooze, a 2-mana 2/2 creature ooze. You can pay a green mana and exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, put a +1/+1 counter on Scavenging Ooze and you gain 1 life. Skitterbeam Battalion's up next, a 9-mana 4/4 artifact creature construct that has trample and haste, and when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, create 2 tokens that are copies of it. Now it also has a prototype, so it has a prototype ability. So you may cast this spell with different mana cost, color, and size. It keeps its abilities and types. So instead of paying 9 mana, you can pay 5 mana and it'll enter as a 2/2. So that's what we're most likely going to be doing, but in the late game you could pay 9 and get 3/4/4s. Next up here we have Sky Hunter Strike Force, a 3 mana 2/2 creature cat knight. It has flying and melee, so whenever this creature attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each opponent you attack this combat. And then it has Lieutenant. As long as you control your commander, other creatures you control have melee. I'm not too sure how to pronounce this one. I think it's Sovereign Akanek Ahua? I don't know, but it is a 4 mana 3/4 legendary creature cat noble. It has Ward 2. And it's a bit hard to read, it's foil, but it says whenever it attacks, for each creature you control with power greater than that creature's base power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on that creature equal to the difference. Spawnwraith is up next, a 3 mana 2/2 creature elemental that has trample. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put a token that's a copy of Spawnwraith onto the battlefield. Taurian Mauler is up next, a 3 mana 2/2 creature shapeshifter that has changeling, so it's every single creature type. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Taurian Mauler. And our final creature is Wilson Refined Grizzly, a 2 mana 2/2 legendary creature bear warrior. It can't be countered. It has vigilance, reach, and trample, and it has Ward 2. And then it has choose a background, but we're not going to be doing that because he's not our commander. Alrighty, so now we're going to jump into sorceries here, and our first sorcery is Balaged Recovery, a 3 mana sorcery that says return target card from your graveyard to your hand, and then if you want, you can instead play it for the other side here, which is Balaged Sanctuary, which is a land that enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for green. Blasphemous Act is up next, a 9 mana sorcery that costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield, and it deals 13 damage to each creature. Destroy the Dead is up next, or Vanquish the Horde. This is the Secret Lair Evil Dead version. This is an 8 mana sorcery that costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield, and it says destroy all creatures. Dusk and Dawn is up next. The Dusk side is a 4 mana sorcery that says destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. And then Dawn is a sorcery that has Aftermath. So you cast the spell from your graveyard, then you exile it, and return all creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. Our next sorcery is Farseek. It's 2 mana, and you can search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. One of my favorite cards in this deck is Fourth Aerolingas, an X red and a white card, that sorcery that says create X 2/2 red human knight creature tokens with trample and haste, and whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to one or more players this turn, you become the monarch. So being able to create X 2/2s at instant speed that have haste and trample is incredible, especially if we create, let's just say we create 3 and we have our commander out. That's 15 total power when they attack. That's very good, and that can end games quickly. And it gets progressively better as the game goes on. You can pump more mana into it. Nature's Lore is up next, a 2 mana sorcery that says search your library for a forest card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. We have Rampant Growth, 2 mana sorcery, search your library for a basic land card, put it into play tapped, shuffle your library afterwards. And our final sorcery is 3 Visits, 2 mana sorcery, search your library for a forest card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Next, we're going to jump into our instants. Our first instant is Akroma's Will, a 4 mana instant that says choose one. If you control a commander as you cast the spell, you may choose both. Creatures you control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn. Or creatures you control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from all colors until end of turn. So if you control your commander and have a full board, this will just win the game on the spot. This is an amazing card. We have Beast Within, a 3 mana instant that says destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. Cloud Shift is our next instant at 1 mana. and it says exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. We have Deflecting Swat, a 3-mana instant that says if you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost. You may choose new targets for target spell or ability. Up next is Eerie Interlude, a 3-mana instant that says exile any number of target creatures you control. Return those creatures to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Ephemerate is our next instant at 1 mana, and it says exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control, and it has Rebound. So if you cast the spell from your hand, exile it as it resolves. At the beginning of the next upkeep, you may cast this spell from exile without paying its mana cost. Ghostway is a 3-mana instant that says exile each creature you control. Return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. We have Heroic Intervention, a 2-mana instant that says permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Teferi's Protection is a 3-mana instant. Until your next turn, your life total can't change and you gain protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out. While they're phased out, they're treated as though they don't exist. They phase in before you untap during your untap step, and you exile Teferi's Protection after it resolves. And our final instant here is Valakut Awakening at 3 mana. Put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards +1. Or you can play it for the other side here, or on the other side here, which is Valakut Stoneforge, a land that enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it for red. Up next, we have artifacts. So our first artifact is Asika's Chariot, a 4-mana 4/4 legendary artifact vehicle. So when Asika's Chariot enters the battlefield, create 2/2/2 green cat creature tokens. Whenever Asika's Chariot attacks, create a token that's a copy of target token you control, and it has crew 4. So it's an artifact, but then you can tap creatures with power greater to or equal to 4, with total power equal to 4, and then it'll become a creature until end of turn, so it can attack, block, all those things. Also, this card is also called the Cat Alack, because it's a cat vehicle. I'll see myself out. Up next here we have Swiftfoot Boots, a 2-mana artifact equipment. Equip creature as hexproof and haste, and equip 1. I originally was running Lightning Greaves, but Lightning Greaves are a serious problem in this deck because they give Shroud, and I want to exile my commander sometimes, and I can't target it if it has Shroud. So we go with hexproof. It will unequip when it enters the battlefield again, but still, having hexproof is nice because Duskana, people will try to remove her. Our final artifact is the Great Henge, a 9-mana legendary artifact. It costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You can tap it for 2 green, and you gain 2 life. And then whenever a whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. Messing up my words here. Next up, we have Enchantments, and we have Ayula's Influence at 3 mana, and it says discard a land card and create a 2/2 green bear creature token. So what I like to do with this is, if I've drawn a bunch of cards with Duskana, I'll discard those lands before my end step to create bears, or at the like on someone else's turn, I can discard some lands, create some bears, and then on my turn, I'll be able to swing with them right away. So pretty fun. Another win con in this deck is Beastmaster Ascension, a 3-mana enchantment that says whenever a creature you control attacks, you can put a quest counter on Beastmaster Ascension, and as long as Beastmaster Ascension has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. So with our commander out, and we have all the counters on it, they're +10, they're 10/10s, which is very good. Blessed Sanctuary is our next enchantment at 5 mana. It says prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to you and creatures you control. And then whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white unicorn creature token. So apparently unicorn tokens don't officially exist. So if you want to run this card, either use like infinity tokens or just other tokens than unicorns, because they aren't real. Found that out recently. Chivalric Alliance is next, a 2-mana enchantment that says whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, draw a card, and then you can pay 2 mana to discard a card and create a 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with Vigilance. Feed the Pack is a 6-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you can sacrifice a non-token creature. If you do, put X 2/2 green wolf creature tokens onto the battlefield where X is the sacrificed creature's toughness. Felidar Retreat is a 4-mana enchantment that has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. Create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain Vigilance until end of turn. Growing Rites of Itlimoc is a 3-mana legendary enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 4 or more creatures, transform Growing Rites of Itlimoc. And it'll transform into this amazing land that taps for green. It's Itlimoc, Cradle of the Sun. It taps for green, or you can tap it to add green for each creature you control. Guardian Project is our next enchantment at 4 mana. When a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature in your graveyard, draw a card. Rhythm of the Wild is a 3-mana enchantment. Creature spells you control can't be countered, and non-token creatures you control have Riot. So they enter the battlefield with your choice of a +1/+1 counter or haste. Up next, we have everyone's favorite, Smothering Tithe, a 4-mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If the player doesn't, you create a treasure token. And I got the awesome new anime borderless art, which I just picked up today, so happy about that. Our next enchantment is Teleportation Circle, a 4-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Our final enchantment is Zendikar's Royal, a 5-mana enchantment that says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 2/2 green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. All right, now we're going to jump into non-basic lands. Our first non-basic land is Argoth, Sanctum of Nature. As it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary green creature. It taps for green, or you can pay 4 mana and tap it and create a 2/2 green bear creature token, then mill 3 cards, activate only as a sorcery. It melds with Titania, Voice of Gaia, but we're not going to be melding because we don't have her in this deck, but very good card for creating bears. Battlefield Forge is up next. It taps for colorless, or it taps for red or white, and it deals 1 damage to you if you do. Boseiju Who Endures, a legendary land that taps for green, and it has channel, so you can pay 2 mana and discard it. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search their library for a land card with a basic land type, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. Bountiful Promenade is a land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, and it taps for green or white. We have Brushland. It is a land that taps for colorless, or it taps for green or white, and it deals 1 damage to you if you do. Cavern of Souls. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, tap for colorless, or tap it for 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, and that spell can't be countered. Up next, we have Clifftop Retreat. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain or a plains, and it taps for red or white. Courser Running Command Tower, a land that taps for 1 mana of any color and your commander's color identity. We got Iganjo, Seat of the Empire, a legendary land that taps for white, or you can channel it, so you can pay 3 mana and discard it. It deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. Got Exotic Orchard, a land that taps for 1 mana of any color that no land an opponent controls could produce. Fabled Passage is a land that you can tap and sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Then if you control 4 or more lands, untap that land. We're running Field of the Dead. It is a land that enters the battlefield tapped. It taps for colorless, and whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Jetmir's Garden is a land that is a mountain forest plains. It taps for red, green, or white. It enters the battlefield tapped, or in the late game, or I guess anytime you want, you can cycle it, pay 3 mana, discard this card, draw a card. Karplusan Forest is next, a land that taps for colorless, or you can tap it for red or green and it deals 1 damage to you. Overgrown Farmland is a land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, and it taps for red or white. We have Reliquary Tower, which is foil, so it might be hard to read, but it is a land that says you have no max hand size, and you can tap it for colorless. Rockfall Vale enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, and it has tap for red or green. Rootbound Crag enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain or a forest, and you can tap it for red or green. We have Sacred Foundry, a land that is a mountain or a plains. You can tap it for red or white, and as it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. And this is my national park land, so this is the Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona. We have Sokazan, Crucible of Defiance, a legendary land that taps for red. You can channel it, so you can pay 4 mana and discard it. Create 2 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens. They gain haste until end of turn. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. Spectator Seeding is up next. A land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, and you can tap it for red or white. We have Spire Garden, which is the exact same thing. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, and it taps for red or green. Got Stomping Ground, a land that is a mountain or forest. It taps for red or green, and as it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. And we have the national park, the Great Smoky Mountains in North Carolina. Sundown Pass is up next. A land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, and it taps for red or white. Sunpetal Grove enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest or a plains, and it taps for green or white. Temple Garden is a land that is a forest or a forest plains. It taps for green or white, and as it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. And this is Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. All right, and lastly, we have our basic lands, and we're running snowlands and regular lands to trigger Field of the Dead. So we have forest and a snow-covered forest, mountain and snow-covered mountain, and plains and snow-covered plains. Alrighty, so this has been my deck tech for Duskana the Rage Mother. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. This is a very fun deck. It's very powerful, especially if you can build up. I guess that's the case for all Naya decks, but yeah, very fun, very good. And yeah, like the video, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much.